Ladies and gentlemen, we are all gathered here for me to give you an update on what happened with the whole I went to a Oneness Pentecostal church on accident situation. So, okay. If y'all haven't watched that video yet, please go back and watch it because I still think it is a good topic of discussion with me just sharing my experience of what happened that day. But the pastor whom I follow on social media and he follows me as well, he reached out to me. He was like, "Sis, our church isn't oneness. Like, what are you talking about?" So I said, you know what, I would love to talk about this whole thing in person because we live in the same city or whatever. We have a few mutual friends so a group of us, we ended up going out for coffee, and he kind of explained the situation to me. He said, well, here's the thing. The church used to be pastored by a pastor who was, at the time when he was still alive, he was a oneness pastor. I am a Trinitarian pastor, and I took over the church. And so now I'm working on helping this church to become better in theology, orthodox in their theology. And also, I'm also pastoring my church and I'm helping them through some of these same theological issues. So we are not oneness. And I was like, okay, cool. All right. So y'all probably like, now, Miss Titus, you did all that ranting and raving and the church wasn't even oneness. Yes, that is true. That is true. But me and the pastor talked about this, and I also told him I would be doing a follow-up video without mentioning any details, of course, about the church, whereabouts and all that kind of stuff. But I basically said, I was just going based off of the conversation that I had, based on how the people who were there that day answered my questions. That is why I concluded that, oh, well, this is the theology of the church. So I also explained to him, I'm like, I share my experiences with having conversations with people who have different worldviews and different things. So, there was I wasn't trying to be out here exposing the church or trying to make anybody feel bad because I think he felt like, man, like, why are you trying to terrorize my people? Not my intention at all. So anyway, and I'm definitely not saying that to be like mean or anything. That was just kind of how our conversation went. So I got to share the heart behind my video. He got to share what's going on behind the scenes in his church and all the struggles of pastoring, especially pastoring a new church and pastoring people who just haven't had the theological training that most people don't really get in church these days. So I said all that to say, I am so glad. For one, I'm glad I went. I'm glad that I asked the questions that I did about the doctrinal statement. I'm glad that he saw the video, although I honestly didn't think that he would see it or know that I was talking about his church because he wasn't there that day. So, I took a risk knowing, for one, it's probably going to help people because then I can share with them, like, okay, if a church is saying things like this, or if this particular phrase or word pops up, then that could be a red flag. And a red flag doesn't mean abort ship. I think a red flag means ask questions for clarity. That was really the purpose of the video. Don't be afraid to ask people about doctrine. And I shared with him too. I said, coming from a background where a lot of my family is caught up in oneness Pentecostalism, or hyper legalism, hyper fundamentalism, and all this kind of stuff, it's important for me nowadays. Like, I want to know that when I'm going somewhere, or if I'm recommending a church to someone, I want to be confident that the church that I'm sending them to or recommending to them is solid and sound, and it actually is going to help people to understand and know the gospel and to interpret their Bibles better and to learn theology the right way instead of, some of this wonky stuff that's floating around. So I think when I shared that with him, he was like, okay, like, that's fair enough. So I also wanted to share this update because I just want people again to be comfortable asking questions and talking to church leadership. It just seems like so many people, just when we go to church, it's like we are trained to cut our brains off at the door, and any type of question or any type of disagreement or challenge is seen as like, being divisive. And there are times to be divisive. So if that church actually is or was a church that's outside of Christian orthodoxy, like, I would never recommend anyone go there. But if they are, just they're in the middle of a discipleship season, okay, that's fair. I can share some grace, but I don't think that Christians should continually be under this assumption that doctrine really doesn't matter and that it's wrong to ask questions or challenge people when you have a true concern. And I'm also concerned with the fact that most people really aren't even thinking about theology when they go to a church. It's like, as long as you hear certain buzzwords or worship is good, or it's a nice building, or the pastor is famous, that's enough to declare it a great church. And I'm like, we got to get past that, because when you got bad theology, it impacts you in other areas of your life. And another reason that I think this is super important is because if Christians don't have their theology right, how are they gonna make disciples? How are they gonna evangelize properly? How are they gonna fulfill 1 Peter 3:15, which talks about having a good reason for the faith that you have? So when the Hebrew Israelite or the Jehovah's Witness or the Mormon or any other fringe group either knocks on your door or approaches you at lunch, or maybe tries to come into your church and infiltrate your church, you should be able to defend why you know that Christianity is true, or at least why you're confident that Christianity is true. And we got to stop thinking about our faith as if it's just my opinion versus your opinion. If Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true. If Jesus is God, Christianity is true. If Jesus is not God and or did not rise from the dead, Christianity is not true. Now, I'm of the opinion, based on the research that I've done, based on what we see in science and history and philosophical arguments, I am confident that Christianity is not just true because I like it. It's not true because I grew up in a Christian home. It's not true because I grew up going to church. It's true because Jesus rose from the dead. Okay. That's how we have to think about our faith. And there's tons of evidence to support the claims that are written in the Gospels. So the Gospels are historical documents. The New Testament, basically the entire Bible is a historical document. I think sometimes we just look at it like, oh, it's just a rule book. It just tells me to do this and not do this. And of course, God's commands are in the Bible, but the Bible is also like a record of what happened in history between how God reconciled man to himself, the story of redemption, the story of the people in the Old Testament, the Hebrews, the Israelites, and their interactions with God and their interactions with people and their failures, and all these other things that they accomplished through the Old Testament and through God's acts through the apostles and God's acts through the church. So yeah, the Bible is just so chock full of wisdom and history. There's archaeology that corroborates what's written in the Bible, and there's just so many resources. Especially, y'all know I love Christian apologetics, which is basically just defending the faith. There's so many resources nowadays. Whereas Christians, you don't have to guess or just sit uncomfortably and have a question about Christianity and just assume that there is no answer. You don't have to assume that you don't have access to the answers now, since everyone has a computer at their fingertips. So I hope this encourages someone. Be able to have conversations, and it doesn't have to be a screaming match. When me and that pastor linked up, I was like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm very sorry that we're meeting under this awkward circumstance, because that was never my intention. I didn't intend for this to be like a whole thing that it became, but it became a thing. But now I got we were kind of already friends on social media, but now we're like friends in real life, because after, I think we talked about that situation for like the first 4 or 5 minutes, and then we had moved on to something else, and all was fine. So I'll probably go back and visit the church. I think overall it was good. And I got clarity, I got clarity on the questions that I had, and there was no smoke. So you should be able to go to a church. If your church doesn't allow you to ask questions, or if you get pushback when you ask questions and people make you feel like something is wrong, I think that is a red flag. And I think you should challenge your people about that. I think a lot of times people don't want other people to ask them questions because they may not know the answer. I know that's typically been that's been why I didn't like people asking me certain questions in certain situations. You can ask me certain questions now and I'll be like, you know what? I probably should know that, but I don't know that, and that's okay. But I don't think it's okay being comfortable in I just don't want to know at all. I'm comfortable being as ignorant as possible as a Christian, because It's just all about experience or feelings and emotions. No, as Christians, we need to be disciples. We need to be making disciples. And I think that we should strive to find out as much as we can about God so that we can help share the gospel and spread the gospel. Okay? Can I get an amen? All right, y'all. If y'all like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. Please consider becoming a channel member if any of this was interesting to you and you want to financially support me. And also, if you would like to help me go to Greece, please donate to my GoFundMe, or you can Cash at me, and I will leave the details for that in the description and also in the comment section. So with that, I will leave you, and I will catch you guys in the next video.